Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare recess at any time. Today, the Rules Committee is convening to consider two separate measures, SJ-Res 13 and SJ-Res 31. SJ-Res 13 provides for congressional disapproval of a rule submitted by the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency of the Department of the Treasury relating to the review of applications under the Bank Merger Act. The OCC's bank merger rule is as biased as it is flawed. It discourages competition within the industry, erects swaths of red tape that ensnare bank merger application, and erodes the integrity of our financial system. This rule is not grounded in sound policy. It serves to kneecap small and mid-sized banks while restricting access to credit for millions of customers across the country. This is yet another Biden-era rule that we must dispense with, and we intend on doing so. SJ-Res 31 provides for congressional disapproval of a rule submitted by the Environmental Protection Agency relating to, quote, review of final rule reclassification of major sources as area sources under Section 112 of the Clean Air Act, end quote. EPA's rule is misguided. It unfairly binds American energy producers in a regulatory straitjacket while removing a common sense incentive for them to lower their own emissions. The former rule that was put into place during President Trump's previous term encouraged these energy producers to take positive and substantive steps to reduce emissions without the looming threat of a regulatory barrage. But this EPA rule runs counter to that, and it operates on a premise that is unjust. What America needs is a vigorous energy manufacturing posture and not one that's riddled with endless regulatory hoops that energy producers are required to jump through. Achieving American energy dominance is not found through over-regulation. It's found through good, sensible policies that are not heavy-handed and inflexible. The EPA's rule is not grounded in good, sensible policy, and that's precisely why it must be overturned. Over the last 4 years, the private sector found itself contorted into knots thanks to the previous administration's proclivity to regulate the hell out of everything. But it's a new year, a new Congress, and new administration. We're moving in a better direction. With that, I look forward to today's discussion, and I now yield to Mr. McGovern for any comments he wishes to make.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. Let me just say, these are two lousy, terrible measures that you have us considering here today. More help for big banks and big polluters. That's been the entire Republican agenda so far. Help the polluters, help the banks, help Wall Street, help the CEOs. You guys want to help everyone except everyday people who actually need help. It's honestly beyond shameful. But to be honest, it's not even worth it to talk about these CRAs. What I do want to talk about is the fact that this morning, after midnight actually, Republicans told us that we would be considering their budget reconciliation bill at 1 o'clock in the morning on Wednesday. If Trump's big, beautiful bill is so great, why not debate it when people are still awake? Wouldn't you want everyone to know how great it is? Why are you debating it at 1 o'clock in the morning? I think that's prime time in Guam. Any person with half a brain cell can immediately figure out why you want to notice a meeting for 1 a.m. It's because you don't want people to know what's in your bill. Remember what Trump said? Close your eyes and vote for it. That's exactly what you're all doing because you all know exactly what the bill does, how unpopular it is, and what regular Americans think of it. It's going to give a huge, massive, historic tax cut to billionaires, paid for by stealing from the American people, ripping away Medicaid from parents and grandparents, ripping away food assistance from kids. This is not hyperbole, my friends. We're not fear-mongering. No matter how many times you use the word, that doesn't make it true. Your big, beautiful scam is a historic giveaway to those at the very, very top, financed and paid for by the rest of America. So again, I ask, if this bill is so great, why debate it at 1 o'clock in the morning? And we all know the answer, and we all know why. And the icing on the cake, and we're not even sure what's in that bill. You have a meeting on at 1 o'clock in the morning. We have a meeting on the calendar, and you're still arguing amongst yourselves behind closed doors about how much you want to basically screw over people on Medicaid. Late last night, there were reports that some of the extreme holdouts strong-armed the leadership into fast-tracking Medicaid cuts so that people could be kicked off their health care as soon as 2026. That's next year. All this is to say that nobody, aside from the Republican leadership, will actually know exactly what is in this bill until you vote for it. It could be entirely different from what we know now, and we won't even really have a chance to look at it or understand its impacts until we have to vote on it. That doesn't make any sense. But like Trump told you guys, close your eyes and vote for it. Pretend it won't do what we all know it's going to do. And that's how you govern around here now. And guess what? If you do close your eyes and vote for it, I can guarantee it's going to come back and haunt you. People aren't stupid, and they're going to know that you betrayed them when they see what your bill does to their families and to their communities. You know, no matter how what you think about this budget reconciliation bill, the idea, again, that the Rules Committee is going to begin consideration at 1 o'clock in the morning, I don't think I've ever seen or heard anything like that before. I get it if hearings went late and you had to do a markup and the vote wasn't until late in the night, but at least you started the debate when people could still pay attention. This is no way to govern, Madam Chair, and you know that. And we know that, but nevertheless, here we are. So let's get through today. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses and to those on this committee. I look forward to seeing you back here at 1 o'clock in the morning on Wednesday as Republicans look to strip basic needs from moms and dads, kids, and seniors so they can give even more to the big donors that write their campaign checks. With that, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. McGovern. Without objection, any prepared statements that our witnesses have may be included in the record. I now welcome our first panel, Representative Flood and Representative Caston from the Committee on Financial Services. Your full statement will be submitted for the record, and we ask that you summarize your statement in 5 minutes. Representative Flood, I welcome your testimony.
Thank you, Chairwoman Foxx, Ranking Member McGovern, and members of the Rules Committee. Thanks for the opportunity to talk about SJ Res 13. I offer my full support for this resolution of disapproval, which would nullify the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency's final rule that makes it significantly harder for banks to merge. Mergers and acquisitions are a crucial part of a dynamic financial system, particularly for community and regional banks. These institutions help their communities grow and thrive. Mergers enable banks to expand, reach more customers, diversify services, and reduce costs, all of which benefit American families and small businesses. In today's environment where regulatory burdens are growing and technological demands are intensifying, mergers are often the only way smaller banks can stay competitive with larger institutions. Large banks benefit from economies of scale that allow them to absorb the rising compliance and technology costs. But for smaller and mid-sized banks, think about my home state of Nebraska, where we have over 130 community banks, especially in rural areas, mergers are often the only way to stay strong and keep serving customers. Unfortunately, the OCC's final rule takes us in the wrong direction. Instead of simplifying the process, it would make mergers more costly and complicated without offering any clear benefit. The OCC says the rule will enhance transparency and public input by clarifying how the agency evaluates merger applications. But in practice, it would only increase uncertainty for banks that want to merge. For example, the rule would shift the burden of proof onto applicant banks, requiring them to demonstrate that their proposed merger meets approval criteria. That's a major change in regulatory practice, which would lead to unnecessary delays and inject confusion into the merger review process. The rule would also eliminate procedures that allowed for expedited reviews of mergers between smaller, well-capitalized banks. These provisions were important. They helped community banks merge quickly and efficiently without unnecessary red tape. Taking those options away would make it harder for smaller banks to grow, which ultimately strengthens the position of the largest financial institutions. Less competition in the financial systems means fewer choices and options for both consumers and businesses. This rule wouldn't just create headaches for banks. It hurts the communities they serve, especially those that depend on small and mid-sized institutions for affordable access to financial services. Delays and regulatory hurdles pull resources away from lending, innovation, and reinvestment at a cost to everyday Americans. I believe federal banking agencies should work to streamline the bank merger review process to make it easier for healthy, well-capitalized banks to merge. The OCC's rule would move us in the wrong direction. That's why I strongly urge my colleagues to support SJ Res 13. By overturning this rule, we can help keep our banking system competitive, innovation-driven, and responsive to the needs of families, small businesses, and communities across America. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Flood. Representative Caston, you're recognized.
Chair Foxx, Ranking Member McGovern, members of the committee, thank you for having me. I appear on behalf of Ranking Member Waters to urge the committee not to advance SJ Res 13 to the floor. And I would observe, in response to Mr. Flood's comment, America does not actually have a shortage of big banks, and we don't have any apparent problem with allowing them to merge. What we do have, we've got financial reform experts, consumer groups, members of Congress who've been raising concerns for years that banking regulators have been rubber stamping bank merger applications and have not fully scrutinized those applications to ensure that they comply with statutory requirements, provide benefit to affected constituencies, and don't undermine financial stability. The result has been less competition, more costly products for consumers, more banking deserts across the country as local banks are subsumed into larger regional and national players. Point of fact, data here, the last time that bank regulators in America rejected a merger application was more than 2 decades ago, in 2003. During that same period, the number of community banks in the United States has fallen by 46%. That's 3,600 small banks that are gone since the last time we reviewed a bank merger application. Former President Biden responded to this problem with an executive order encouraging the Department of Justice and banking regulators to update their merger review procedures, which have not been updated since 1995. The OCC was one of the agencies that updated its procedures through a rule issued after a notice and comment period last year, and I want to highlight just a couple points of that rule that are really important. First, the rule eliminated a prior requirement that mergers must be automatically approved within 15 days of the end of the comment period when a target bank has less than 50% of the assets of the acquiring bank. That's really important to the health of small banks because effectively it means that it is much easier for a small bank to raise capital by selling to a bigger national regional bank than by merging with a local bank. That rubber stamp has contributed significantly to that rapid decline of those lower community banks. And I'd point out, as the St. Louis Fed has noted, community banks are, quote, uniquely positioned to meet the challenges of lending to small businesses as they have deep insight into the local economic conditions of business opportunities. So when we cut community banks, we hurt small businesses in our communities. I'd also note, given the volume of DOGE-driven layoffs at the OCC, any mandated review time, coupled with fewer reviewers, means there's going to be less regulatory scrutiny. So eliminating this OCC rule now will only accelerate the demise of our community banks to the detriment of the small businesses on which our economy depends. Second, the OCC rule brought transparency by including a new policy statement to clarify how the OCC would evaluate statutory factors like financial stability, managerial resources, and community needs. Given the broader uncertainties in our economy right now, we should not be removing a rule that is designed to make it easier for businesses to plan with certainty. Third, the rule ensured that mergers resulting in banks with more than $50 billion in total assets would receive more scrutiny, potentially by convening public hearings. It should be in all of our interest to ensure that limited government resources are preferentially and efficiently allocated to the most significant challenges. Finally, and most problematically, this CRA would not rescind anything, because President Trump's acting comptroller of the currency already rescinded this rule last week when he issued an interim final rule that took effect on May 15th. So as a practical matter, while I disagree with the policy of that decision, if we bring this to the floor, we are making no change in the near term. We are simply assuming that if the current acting comptroller of the currency is not infallible and makes a mistake, we can't go back and fix this later. Now, that matters in part because the OCC is not the only bank regulator. Depending on who you are as a bank, a merger may be subject to the jurisdiction of the FDIC, may be just subject to the jurisdiction of the Fed. And so by only weakening one of them, we're creating a regulatory arbitrage opportunity where banks can seek to merge with banks that have a charter where the primary regulator has the weakest review standards. I would point out that that happened in 2008. The weakest banks were trying to get charters from the weakest regulator, the Office of Thrift Supervision, and we had to shut them down in 2008. We should not be repeating past mistakes. Fred Kahn, who was the head of the Civil Aviation Administration under Ronald Reagan, famously said, oversaw the deregulation of that agency. He famously said that the process of deregulation shifts the burden of consumer protection from rate setting to antitrust enforcement, and it fails when it abandons the former without implementing the latter. So we find ourselves in a situation now where the weakening of financial regulators, coupled with the recent rescission of this OCC rule, is going to create a Wild West where only the biggest and most well-connected survive. That is not capitalism, that is Mad Max anarchy. Our job, I'd suggest our responsibility as the Article I branch, should be to check those excesses from the Article II branch, not simply act as a rubber stamp for their actions in the way that they would like the OCC to be for big bank mergers. So in conclusion, I'd like to emphasize this committee that our constituents sent us here to make our economy stronger, to make our entrepreneurs more successful, and to prevent financial instability, not just to defund the white-collar police until a financial crisis comes that we can try to blame on our predecessors. In that vein, I urge members to reject the resolution and look forward to any questions you may have.
Thank the gentleman. Now recognize Mr. Roy for any questions that he might have.
No questions, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Now recognize Mr. McGovern for any questions that he might have.
Well, thank you very much. You both are good guys and good members of Congress, but I hope you realize that you're here because they need a filler. And that's why HJ Res 13 and SJ Res 31 are here before the Rules Committee kind of unexpectedly. This committee was supposed to convene at noon to deal with the budget reconciliation bill, which apparently is in a state of disarray at this particular moment. And as you heard me in my opening statement say that they now intend to bring up budget reconciliation to the Rules Committee at 1 a.m. on Wednesday morning, 1 a.m. It just seems to me that when we're dealing with big issues like food assistance, like health care, even the future of AI, one would like to think that no matter what your opinion is on these things, that you'd like to do it in the light of day so that people could actually see what's going on and listen to the debate on both sides of the issue. But it's going to be brought up at 1 a.m. in the morning. And again, this is a process committee, and one would like to think that we could set an example for other committees by doing process in a better way, which includes doing major legislation in the light of day. But if you were to expect that from this particular Rules Committee, you'd be deeply, deeply disappointed. So again, I don't really have any questions because, again, you're filler, and you're not what we're supposed to be dealing with right now. And so, Mr. Chairman, I will yield back.
Appreciate the gentleman yielding back. Would point out that we're dealing with Senate joint resolutions that have already passed the Senate, so we're in the middle of a lawmaking process, and now recognize Mr. Langworthy for his time of questioning.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Representative Flood, strategic decisions on a possible merger between two financial institutions, they don't happen in a vacuum, and they have to be made in a timely manner, often in a matter of days or a few weeks. Is it too much to expect our regulators to rise to the occasion and provide approvals needed in a framework that is in line with the realities of a competitive financial services sector?
Quickly at the same pace of the financial sector. So I don't think it's too much to ask.
And by making it even more difficult for small and medium-sized banks to make strategic decisions on mergers, Can you touch once more on the impact that this will have on consumers in their access to credit and innovation in innovative financial services?
Well, delays in merger activities obviously limit access to credit and services. Small banks need mergers to stay competitive and offer better options. Without timely decisions, things cut up, red tape, innovation stalls, and ultimately communities, especially rural ones where I live, lose vital banking services.
Thank you, Representative Flood. Innovative sectors of our economy should never be forced to sacrifice competitiveness or creativity just to satisfy the shifting preferences of Washington bureaucrats. We need a financial services industry that is both well-supervised and globally competitive. This CRA helps put our regulatory framework back on track after years of the Biden administration's overreach and micromanagement. And I look forward to supporting this legislation on the floor, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. I now recognize Ms. Scanlon for her time of questioning.
Thank you. I did want to pick up on something that the ranking member said. You know, we got this notice of this emergency meeting that we have to do at 1 a.m. on Wednesday. We got it sometime in the middle of the night last night, which apparently was spurred by the middle of the night meeting of the Budget Committee. Yes, I guess it was 10 p.m. But so this is going to be the second middle of the night meeting under cover of darkness for this big, bad BS reconciliation bill that we're supposed to be considering, and nobody seems to know what's in it. The notice says that it's an emergency meeting. I've been trying to figure out what the emergency is, other than the fact that the bill's so bad nobody wants it to see the light of day. So just wondering if you can clue us in on what the emergency is, or when we might see what we're actually going to be considering at 1 a.m. on Wednesday?
I would say to the gentlelady, negotiations are still continuing on tweaking the bills that have all gone through their respective committees of jurisdiction. So 99% of what we will have in front of us is already known. There is that little element there. And then when you get into all the different time requirements that we have in our rules, if we wish to go home at a reasonable time, we have to, for the Memorial Day weekend, we must move forward with the timescales that we are given. And that means, I mean, unless my colleagues in the minority want to restrict their time, which I'm not asking you to do, I'm just saying, knowing how much time you all will want to spend talking about this, I suspect it'll be much like what happened in Energy and Commerce, where we went for 26 and a half hours. And what ended up happening is that at least one of the speakers on the minority side said something about, here we are in the middle of the night, and we'd already made it to 3 p.m. There will be plenty of time for the American people to see the debate, both on the rule, on the underlying bill, both in this committee, in the committees that have already met, and on the floor.
Okay, well, I think it's a little less of tweaking the bill than tweeting about the bill, because we're certainly learning more about the bill from Mr. Roy's Twitter account than we are from any official processes. But I think, Mr. McGovern, I was going to yield to him for a minute.
Let's be clear, this is an artificial deadline. This is the deadline that you guys have kind of decided to put into place on your own. There's no magic date that this doesn't have to be done by Friday. You can do it. You can get back and do this in the light of day when you get back, and do hearings in the light of day. I'd also say to you that, yeah, the Energy and Commerce Committee went on and on and on, and everybody got hurt. In the Agriculture Committee, the chairman cut us off. I mean, stopped debate and stopped us from offering amendments at a certain period of time. So yeah, I'm glad you're acknowledging that the Rules Committee will have a robust debate. I hope we don't get cut off, because it will be long. It'll be long. But I yield back.
Okay, thank you. I guess we should discuss a little bit of the substitute, the fodder that has been tossed at us here for this week. And this is the joint resolution to remove regulations regarding banking mergers. And I am concerned about that, because it does seem to tie the hands of bank regulators to do anything to meaningfully oversee the size and power of the nation's largest banks. I know that some of this discussion was about smaller banks, but we don't need to look that far back to see some examples. Just 2 years ago, Silicon Valley Bank failed, largely because our Republican colleagues had rolled back crucial regulations that would have exposed early warning signs that the bank was in trouble. So it doesn't seem like we have to look too far to see that deregulation in this area can be dangerous. It leads to banks being less accountable, more predatory. And we've already got issues with the fact that to the extent that the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau was overseeing these types of, overseeing student loan servicers, big banks, CD payday lenders, that the prosecutions or the investigations into those groups have been dropped by this administration. Coincidentally, just after many of them made multi-million-dollar contributions to the president's inaugural fund. So, we're really concerned about the Foxx being in the henhouse and all. Can you talk about this a little bit, Mr. Caston? What can we expect if we're to go ahead and roll back this regulation?
Sure. Thank you for the question. And if you want an extra hour to debate the bill, we should not bring this to the floor and save some floor time. I'd make the observation, when we were debating our rules package for financial services at the start of the year, I made the observation to Chairman Hill that in my 6 years on the Financial Service Committee, we have always been extremely bipartisan in the wake of a financial crisis and extremely partisan when we try to avoid one. And there's a healthy tension between, we want to make sure that banks have access to capital and can grow. And if we were sitting here in a moment where banks were struggling to merge, or where we saw more and more smaller banks that couldn't reach capital, this would be a good conversation to have. What we've seen is the opposite. The big banks get bigger and bigger. They get bigger sometimes because when we have a crisis, inevitably the regulators say, I need the bank with the biggest balance sheet to buy the bank that's shrinking. You mentioned Silicon Valley Bank. The FDIC bailed them out with taxpayer dollars, and then those assets and with Signature were absorbed by bigger banks, and we ignored antitrust concerns at that point because we didn't want to destabilize the banking sector. We didn't then ask them to disgorge of those assets, right? And what we have right now in this OCC rule that's being repealed we would go back to the old days that says, okay, you're a small bank who wants to grow. You know your local communities. You know the car dealership in your community. You know the local manufacturer. You know that even though maybe they don't have a corporate bond that you can rate against, you play Little League, you coach Little League with the owner's son, and you know the family, you go to church with them, you know who those people are, you know they're good people who can be trusted. Well, if that bank can't merge with the bank next door, but they can merge with Citibank, because now all of a sudden it's expedited approval, then you've lost all that local fabric, and that's what we've seen in our communities. So it's not just the concentration of big banks, it's not just the concentration of risk in big banks that we then have to bail out, but it's the loss of the social fabric of our communities. And I think Mr. Flood and I both agree that there's a lot fewer small banks than there were before. It's not because those banks shut down. It's not because those people lost somebody to get credit. It's because those banks got gobbled up by bigger banks who then shut down the branches. That's what the OCC rule was trying to fix and was making progress in fixing. And to roll this back, as I said a moment ago, it's not capitalism, it's just Mad Max anarchy, that get big quick, and then you can do whatever you want.
Well, I think we're seeing the impact of concentration in a number of sectors, whether it's healthcare, food products, whatever. So I appreciate your perspective and close look at that. Thank you. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Now recognize the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Scott, for his time of question.
I don't really have any questions. I will say this, the way they stepped in and protected the people in Silicon Valley Bank, for those of us from rural America, the Biden administration would have never protected, farmers and small merchants and all the way they did Silicon Valley. Just pretty disturbing to see the double standard in when it's Silicon Valley and your donors, how, they protected them, but they wouldn't do anything for Main Street America. With that, I'll yield.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Flood and Mr. Caston, for your testimony. And I will echo the sentiments that were expressed by the ranking member with respect to the bill that we'll be debating on Wednesday in the dead of night, and the majority's regrettable choice to take up that bill literally, I guess, at 1 a.m. But we'll have more to say on that in the days ahead. Mr. Flood, it's good to see you, and we've got a great partnership, and I very much enjoy our friendship and partnership on a number of different bills, so it pains me to ask you here some perhaps more pointed questions on this particular resolution, but proceed I must. I'm trying to understand, I understand the rationale for the Republicans proposing to disapprove of this rule and to seek its repeal. I disagree with the rationale, but I understand it. This disapproval resolution would essentially, if codified, right, if this resolution is approved and signed by the president, it would repeal a 2024 Biden-era rule. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. And that Biden-era 2024 rule was repealed by the OCC last week.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. So what rule are you all trying to repeal?
Well, while the OCC has rescinded the rule, passing SJ Res 13 remains crucial. It ensures that a similar rule cannot be reissued by the OCC or future administrations without congressional approval.
Got it. So basically the idea is we don't like this rule that President Biden's, or that this regulatory entity under President Biden implemented. The Trump administration has now eliminated that rule, but Congress is going to pass a resolution to disapprove of that rule anyway, so that decades into the future, this agency can never issue a rule, anything like it, without Congress saying so first.
I think it's important that we exercise our Article I authority to tell these agencies what we expect. The regulatory whiplash that we've seen, regardless of who the president is since 2016, is difficult for businesses, banks, and others to predict what the rules are today. This was a change to something that had worked just fine. These mergers weren't banks like Silicon Valley Bank, and Citibank is not dropping into middle of central Illinois and buying Springfield First National Bank. The reality is, the reason we have so many banks consolidating, quite frankly, is that the compliance burden since Dodd-Frank is suffocating Main Street banks. That's the reason that they are fleeing these federal charters and in droves going into state charters, because the OCC's heavy hand has been difficult to deal with. And
Not
here,
to
we're
intervene with
basically-
Mr. Flood, because again, as I said, I understand your rationale, so I'm not,
Well, then you should vote for
I
it.
have a different view. No, I have a different view on the rationale, but I understand why you take the position you do. I'm just simply suggesting it's a question of prioritization of the majority's time, right? The limited floor time that Republicans are utilizing during the course of the 119th Congress, to me, would suggest that we ought to be debating policies that are of great import to the people that we serve. Are you aware of any disapproval resolution being passed by both chambers of Congress and signed by the President of the United States after the rule that is the subject of that resolution having already been eliminated?
I'm the right person to ask, because I did sponsor legislation to repeal SOB 121, which Staff Accounting Bulletin 121, and I also had a hand in passing the CRA large participant rule, which the Senate and then the House, I think, just authorized. I was the House sponsor of that, and I believe it was signed by the President before he went to the Middle East. So I have been engaged in several CRAs. I think more than anything, Congress needs to weigh in.
I don't, no, Mr.
on
Flood,
it.
hold on. Okay, now I've got to correct. You're saying both of those examples are examples in which the
Well,
rules...
larger participant rule was passed, the SOB 121, I don't think was
What do you mean by passed?
was approved by both the House and the Senate.
No, okay, yeah, I think I'm not articulating this well. Okay. The federal agency in this case, the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, has abolished this rule. They issued a rule on May 8th that rescinds the 2024 Biden-era rule, right?
Right.
We're on the same page there. Okay. Is there another example that you know in which the House and the Senate have passed a disapproval resolution that's then signed by the President of the United States to repeal a rule that his administration has already repealed?
Well, I've been in Congress for 3 years, and I can't recall one.
I've been in Congress for 6 years. I can't recall one either, Mr. Flood. That's kind of the point.
but
Well,
let me
no,
share-
finish.
let me share
That's-
this
that's- Let me
perspective,
finish. I'll give you a chance to respond. That's kind of my point, is that, you know, the administration in this case, you know, they agree with you. Republicans made the case that the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency should eliminate this rule. They've issued an interim final rule that rescinds this rule that everyone on your side of the aisle seems to, you know, believe is problematic. I get it. The Trump administration heard you. They repealed the rule. I disagree with their decision, but they proceeded. My issue is that we're now spending yet another week considering yet another CRA disapproval resolution for a rule that's already been repealed. And you and I have a lot of bills together, good bills. These are bills that would foster small business growth and innovation. And I know you don't make the decisions as to what, you know, bills or resolutions come before the Rules Committee or are considered by the majority on the House floor. That's a speaker's decision. That's the chairs of the relevant committees. I'm just suggesting perhaps to them in absentia that there might be a better use of all of our time, Mr. Chairman, than considering disapproval resolutions for rules that don't exist anymore. Like that might be, to me, maybe I'll give the chairman an opportunity to weigh in here. I don't know if he wants to weigh in. Is there? No engage. I mean, how about my colleague from New York? If he wants to, don't want to be heard. Okay. Well, I mean, to me, Mr. Kasten, it's maybe you can enlighten me a little bit of why the majority has there are a lot. Here, a better way to frame this. There are a lot of rules that I believe Republicans and my colleagues respectfully disagree with, right? Rules that were promulgated by the Biden administration. It's unclear to me why they are spending time on a disapproval resolution on the one rule that the Trump administration seems to have already eliminated. Can you help me out, Representative Kasten?
Well, Mr. Neguse, as you know, we've spent a lot of important time this session, you know, repealing refrigerator standards and dishwashers, all sorts of important things. I don't have a good answer to that process question. I think that's a question to take up with leadership. I would just come back to the larger point of this rule, though. There is a tendency, I think, look, we're all U.S. legislators. We all look at the world through a U.S. lens. Sometimes we don't look beyond our borders because we hear from people who talk to us about what the issues are and the challenges, and we all want America to be better. But it's useful to leave our shores sometimes. Myself, Chairman Barr, we were on a bipartisan CODEL to European financial capitals week before the last election. To a person, every European financial regulator we met was jealous of the U.S. financial system. We had them telling us the Basel Accords that we debate at length in our committee about how Basel was hurting U.S. banks. All these European banks were saying Basel is too good for U.S. banks. It's really hurting the banks over here. Mm-hmm. We met with people at the European Central Bank who were observing that in the United States, 70% of the capital in U.S. markets comes from equity and 30% comes from debt. In European markets, 70% comes from debt and 30% comes from equity. They don't have a culture of risk-taking because they don't have capital markets that are deep enough to provide that risk. They were jealous of what we have created over here. I share all that history because in the 3 weeks, 4 weeks since Liberation Day, we saw equity markets in the United States go down, and we saw people run out of treasuries. We have those European asset managers who are now telling us, I need to reduce my exposure to the U.S. economy because I do not trust the United States will be true to its word. If you make a trade agreement with a foreign government, you change that trade agreement just because a president comes in. If I'm going to make an investment in the United States, I want to know that the time it takes me to deploy that capital to secure those contracts will be held up in a court of law, and I don't know if the rule of law still applies in the United States. I
I
had
don't
a
want to
major
cut you off
asset.
here, but the chairman's been indulgent with my time.
Okay, well,
so-
I'll just close by saying I had a major asset manager who told me that Mario Draghi, who said that Europe needs deeper capital markets, but they can't get there because of the structural reforms, is getting everything he wants as American capital runs to Europe right now without making any of the structural reforms they could make. Repealing this rule, doing what we're doing, to use a European word, is an own goal. We don't have to be kicking the ball in our net, but we are kicking the ball in our net right now.
Yeah, well, I certainly agree with you, Mr. Caston, on the merits, and I appreciate your ability to articulate well the reasons why this resolution is short-sighted, in my view, and repealing of the rule is short-sighted, and your defense of the propriety of the rule. I will belabor the initial point that I was attempting to convey, which is simply that this committee has transitioned from debating CRA joint disapproval resolutions, and that being the bulk of the rule committee's work and portfolio in a way that is unlike certainly any past Congress that I've served in. And now we've transitioned to doing that for rules that have already been repealed by the administration. I'm not really sure what the next step is, but I mean, apparently the new norm now is we'll just do joint disapproval of resolutions for rules that, were repealed long ago, but just so that the public knows that Congress really doesn't like this rule, we'll proceed anyway. I will yield back. I appreciate Mr. Flood and Mr. Caston the thoughtful debate. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. I now recognize myself for my time of questioning. And let me start off talking about CRAs. CRAs are really limited in their time scope because you have to act within a certain period of time after the rule has been published in the Federal Registry. For folks back home and for the public to understand, that means every time there's an administration change, and when the administration changes from one party to another and the party that now controls the White House controls the House and the Senate, you're going to see a lot of CRAs. That's the nature of the beast, which is why, for those of you who've only served 3 and 6 years, you may not have seen some of these things before, and I can't speak to whether or not there's been one on a rule that was repealed by an administration, but it's important because this tool was created, although I think it's weak. I don't know why we need the president to sign it anyway. That's kind of defeats the purpose, which is why you don't get many of these during the course of most congressional terms, is because you have to have the party of the House, the Senate, and the White House all lined up to really have any effect, because otherwise the president, if he passes a resolution and his party is still in control, whether it's that president or another president, they're not going to sign a bill that negates the policy that they put into place with their agencies. So CRAs are extremely important, which is why we spend time on CRAs at the beginning of a new period where you have unified House, Senate, even if it's small in the House, Senate, and the presidency. And it's important in another way, and this is one that always bothers me, because I'm a legislator by nature. And I believe that the legislature at the federal level, the United States Congress and the Senate combined, have given away too much power to the executive branch, no matter who is the president of the United States at the time, whether it be a Democrat or a Republican. The CRA is one way, as this CRA points out, it's one way for Congress to take back its power. It says, in this area, we gave authority to the administration, we gave it to their agency, they came up with a rule we didn't like, we want to make sure it doesn't happen again unless Congress passes an act. That's exactly what I want. I want it to be where Congress has to pass an act, and so that we can move forward. And for those of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle who may question this, while I have been alone out there, I have had a bill since 2016, I believe, to take the United States Trade Representative's office and transplant it from the lawn of the White House back to Congress, where I believe it belongs. CRAs are smaller measures. I believe I'm the only person that likes that bill, but I have proposed it because I believe that under the Constitution, we're supposed to have control of trade between the foreign countries and our own. I just lay that out there. This is not something new for me. I believe that CRAs are another way that Congress can take back little teeny pieces of power where we felt like the agencies could handle it, and we may agree or disagree on that on various things, but the agencies didn't do what Congress wanted, and we're going to take a little bit of that power back and keep it with Congress. Thus, it makes perfectly reasonable sense to me, and I think you would agree with me, Mr. Flood, that to make sure that we don't have a rule that changes every 4 years, you want to make sure that if that rule is going to change, it's something that is debated and thought out in Congress, and the way to do that is to pass this CRA, SJ Res 13. Am I not correct on that?
I totally agree, and one of the issues that I think about is waters of the United States. Under President Biden, he wanted to regulate every puddle in Nebraska. Under President Trump, we should have done a CRA because it came back under the Biden administration, and this puts a stake in its heart that says, no, this is the sense of Congress, and we don't agree.
And we don't agree. And we're, in essence, we're taking that power back for the legislative branch where it is supposed to be. And I understand that, you can make the argument that we can't make every regulatory decision out there, which is why we give the agencies the power. But where we don't agree, we should have that power to say no, and that if you want to do that in the future, bring it back to Congress and have a full debate of the then sitting representatives in the United States Congress and the United States Senate. Is that correct?
Well said, Mr. Chairman.
All right.
Would the gentleman yield?
I will yield. I
Just-
love this debate.
I appreciate that, Mr. Chairman. One, just with respect to the contours of the CRA, my understanding is under the statute, the agency can't issue a rule that is substantially in the same form.
That's correct.
It's not. doesn't-
Agency can't, Congress can.
No, I know, but my point is, it doesn't preclude the agency from issuing a rule in that field or
Oh, that's
area
correct.
of
In
law.
that
So I-
particular little area, in that form,
Correct. They
cannot
can't
go
issue a
forward
rule that is
without Congress
substantially
saying, okay.
Exactly. So the OCC in this instance wouldn't be able to issue the same rule that it did. But this does nothing to prevent the OCC under a future administration from issuing a rule that would.
It just can't look like this one.
Precisely. I just want.
All right, that's fair. That's a fair clarification, and I appreciate the gentleman making sure that, because a lot of what we do is people who have insomnia, except for Wednesday, wake up in the middle of the night and watch the reruns. On Wednesday, they can watch live time. That said, I do have a question for you, Mr. Caston, and it's very nice for you to be here, and I'm not sure we've ever had a conversation before, but it's long overdue, and I'm glad we're having it.
Privilege is mine.
From some of your testimony, I gather that one of your concerns is that maybe our antitrust laws are out of whack, or the Federal Trade Commission is not applying them correctly. Is that part of what I heard in some of your concern? Not your main thrust, but at least one of your side concerns.
Well, so I think we should all be concerned that there hasn't been a major antitrust case of any form in the United States in 40 years, practically speaking. I think specific to banks, there is a tension that we have banking regulators who are tasked to oversee the soundness of the financial system, and then separately, we have the Department of Justice and the FTC who are responsible for antitrust enforcement. And too often, those two bodies don't communicate with each other. And particularly when we hit financial crises, we tend to ignore the antitrust concerns because only the big bank can buy them out. And so the result is we have this one-way bet where whenever a crisis comes, you can arbitrage and make small banks into bigger banks by gobbling them up. We never disgorge on the backside, and I think that's been a historic failure of antitrust enforcement, although that's beyond the scope of this particular CRA.
And while financial institution and the laws surrounding that and antitrust might be a little bit outside of my wheelhouse, I have similar concerns in the healthcare arena where I serve on energy and commerce, and we see similar consolidation of healthcare, and I have concerns there too. So maybe at some point we can discuss with our judiciary friends what we might ought to be looking at to see if we can have a little more activity on the antitrust side.
I've long maintained, Mr. Griffith, that it's very easy to survive as a member of Congress if you're pro-business. It's very easy to survive if you're anti-business. It's very hard to survive if you're pro-competition because nobody likes you.
I appreciate that. Mr. Flood, is there anything else that you would like to say before I yield back? And we do have another questioner for you on both sides.
No, I appreciate the discussion. I yield back.
All right, gentleman yields back. I yield back. I now recognize Ms. Leisure Fernandez for her time of questioning.
Thank you. Yeah. Yeah, but he loves his colloquy, and we just love that, don't we, Mr. Chairman? I am going to yield some initial time to our ranking member, Mr. McGovern.
I just want to make two observations, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I appreciate you saying that it's important for us to not cede Congress's constitutional authority to any administration. And, you know, and I hope that means that you will be more outspoken, and Republicans will be more outspoken about what Doge and Elon Musk are doing. This overreach, which I don't even think they have the legal authority to do, of shutting down agencies, of mass firings, of eliminating programs that Congress authorized and appropriated. I haven't heard a peep from my Republican friends on that. And I can tell you right now that when a Democrat gets back in the White House, and if she or he were to act in such a manner, you guys would all be screaming bloody murder right now. So I hope that when we talk about protecting our authorities here, that it's not just with regard to an individual CRA, that we look at the whole picture. And then the second thing, just as an observation, I mean, you guys are in charge. You called this hearing. You know, we have witnesses here to testify. And we up until just now, there's 2 Republicans here, now 3 Republicans out of 9. And I would just respectfully suggest that when you call a hearing, you ought to show up. And again, I hope that this is not what we're going to see at 1 o'clock in the morning. I was on the Agriculture Committee during the markup, and virtually every Republican left the room for engaging in almost no debate, offering no amendments, offering nothing. And then they came back again when it was time to vote. But I really do think when you do hearings, people ought to show up. And I thank the gentlelady for yielding, and I yield back.
Thank you. You know, I really do appreciate that when you answered the question about why we need to do this, you did say that you think that Congress has to take back its Article I authority. Did we all remember that correctly, Mr. Flood?
Yes.
So you think that Congress should take back its Article I authority. So are you willing to agree that Congress should look at the tariffs? Because that is an Article I authority. It's a yes/no question.
I've been here for 3 years. I've seen the pain that the lack of effort on trade policy has created in America, especially for our farmers, and I'm ready for some immediate relief. I want to see us selling beef in all over the world. I want to see us selling our soybeans. I want to see us selling
Do you believe, if that's what you believe, don't you think that Congress should exercise its constitutional Article I authority over tariffs?
It's something I would have to study. I've been a legislator now for 13 years.
Well, wouldn't
I
it
have
be the
chosen
only
this
way we
branch
could
because I think it's
study
the best
it?
branch to be in. and I
Wouldn't
think-
it be that the only way we could study it is if Congress said, we are going to take over our Article I constitutional authority?
Before I would want that, I'd want to find out what its impact would be on our trading relationships.
So let me just clarify. You are willing to stand up for the banks to say Congress should exercise its constitutional authority, but not stand up for, and I will say, there are a lot of farmers, there are cotton farmers in my district, there are dairy farmers, there are all kinds of farmers who are really being hurt by the tariffs. There are a lot of people who are really being hurt by the tariffs. There are Christmas trees that will not have presents under them because of the tariffs, but you're willing to stand up for the banks, but not the consumers or the farmers.
You asked me about trade. I'm standing up for the farmers because under President Trump's first term, what he did with
No, but
trade,
we're
opened
not
markets in Canada, Mexico, and China.
Yes,
I've seen it
under
work
the-
once,
under-
I'll see it work again.
But under tariffs first term, the farmers were hurt so bad, he had to bail them out because the tariffs were so bad.
President Biden did not cut one trade deal. The first president since Jimmy Carter to not even touch trade in 4 years.
Okay, so the other thing is that there was a lot of pain, but the pain that we are experiencing from this trade war, and then he caved to Chinese. I want to think about another area, and Mr. Caston, perhaps you have some thoughts on another area of Article I authority was there was an attack on the CRS and our copyright office. How do you think that fits with Article 1 authority?
I appreciate you asking the question, and man, I wish this was bipartisan. We have, you know, Mr. Griffith, one of the conversations that maybe we can continue on the floor, the entire legislative branch appropriation is about 0.12% of the federal budget. That's smaller than the entire judicial branch appropriation. And obviously, the balance is executive branch. In the legislative branch is the Library of Congress, Copyright Office at CRS. And I don't know how anybody who is proud of the place they work, this Article 1 branch, sits quietly when the Article 2 branch is encroaching. I mean, can you, I'm trying to imagine a scenario where we would put a committee over and run over to the White House and say, we're taking over the EPA. Right? That would be the analog. The White House would be screaming holy, or for that matter, like the Supreme Court is really good at taking authority from us, right? I mean, that was the Loper-Bright decision. When are we, as the legislative branch, truly going to push back? And if we're not going to push back, when they're going into CRS, when they're trying to get in the Office of Workplace Rights in the Congress, this is I mean, it's personal for all of us, right? What protections do we have? Why are we not fighting for that on a bipartisan basis? So I think Mr. Flood and I are in total agreement that the legislative branch should be pushing back. But my God, not only when the president is in your party.
Right, and I really do, Chairman Griffith, appreciate your comments that you think that there is too much power for the executive branch. I would note that every time I do bring my amendment so that Congress could consider the Article 1 authority, you vote no. But hopefully one of these days, we will join together and say that the Constitution means something. We were sent here by our constituents to exercise our Article 1 authority and power, and boy, we need to have the courage to do so. Instead, what we seem to be looking forward to is a meeting that starts at 1 a.m. I think I'm going to call it the zombie committee meeting, right? Or the, shall we call it the zombies? Should we call it, the vampires? We cannot see the light of day. So we are afraid of the light of day, and we're going to start a committee meeting at 1 a.m. in order to consider that big, bad billionaire bill that they are bringing before us. They don't want it to see the light of day. But I am very appreciative that you're going to let us ask as many questions as we need to, because Americans don't really know everything that's in it. We don't know how long it's going to be. Mr. Chairman, do you know if it's going to be over 1,000 pages? Do we even have a sense of how big it's going to be?
I would say that there is a committee print that is out there. The tweaks to that are being negotiated are probably not going to be extensive, and it depends on in what format you read it in as to how many pages it is, but it is not as many pages as I would have feared. I like the bigger print. So you can go from small print, 400 pages, or bigger print, somewhere near 1,000.
Well, the idea of
Just depends on which one you like,
Yeah.
big or small.
Well, I actually have good eyesight close up, but it's really a question of what the American people have. And the reality is that when you say some tweaks, we have no idea what that means because we have not seen them and we don't know what they are. And so we cannot talk to them. And in fact, I read in one article that many Republicans had no idea what was in that bill. And yet they were voting for it because they were lockstep in voting for it. So our job will be indeed to bring out what's in that bill. Now, getting back, I don't know if there's anything else, Mr. Kasten, that you want to add. I am the last Democrat that gets to ask questions. I do appreciate your comment with regards to community banks and local banking, and then the importance of that. And it seems to me that there is something similar between what we're doing now and what we will be doing in our middle of the night meeting, our vampire meeting, is that there seems to be a preference for the bigger corporation, the bigger bank, the bigger over the consumer. We have seen that a lot. And I don't recall that we've had any actual bill come out of financial services that's a bill that's addressing and protecting consumers. Am I remembering that correctly? I don't remember that we've been before rules on a bill, not a CRA.
You're going to test my memory, and I don't recall. I would certainly hope we could protect the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which is looking out for consumers.
That's actually the opposite, right? That Republicans seem to always stand, but they always want to get rid of regulation. And when they say that, what they're actually saying is that we're not going to protect consumers. We are not going to protect workers. We are not going to protect the health and safety of our community. And so we need to say that is what they say. They say get rid of regulation, but it really means do not protect the American people. If there is nothing else?
I guess if you'll humor me the time, I would just like to respond to Mr. Scott's point
Please
about
do.
SVB, because I think Mr. Negusa's point about why we're taking away the right to ever legislate this is I think we ought to be really careful. Recall when Hank Paulson was the Treasury Secretary and the financial crisis was melting down. Hank Paulson used to be a constituent of mine before redistricting, but I think he said this in many public forums. He said, I either need to have a bazooka in my pocket or people need to think I have a bazooka in my pocket because otherwise the world's melting down. You've got your 1 a.m. hearing. My recollection, and I forget if you were on the committee when SVB went down, Mr. Flood, but you remember us sitting there with those long, really stressful calls with all the regulators saying, we've seen $40 billion run out of SVB. We don't know where it went. We don't know if there's contagion in other parts of the system. We need to have all the regulators to figure out how do we shore things up? How do we make sure, forget about protection of the banks, because we let SVB, and this is what I wanted to correct on what Mr. Scott said, we let SVB go bankrupt. We did not protect the investors in SVB, but we did protect all the depositors. And that was because the regulators had those tools. If we are taking away the OCC's ability to use a tool, we can't predict when they might need that authority, right? And I realize I'm conflicting myself a little bit with Article 1 powers, but when bank crises start, you don't have time for 3 weeks of hearings, right? You need to have good people there in those positions, and I do have real concerns if we permanently take authorities away from our financial regulators, that we are complicit in what may follow.
And as I recall, that bank failure, that Great Recession was when there was a Republican in office, right?
Well, the SVB was the SVB and signature
But the
replaced,
last,
but
the last big,
2008
was under
yes,
a Republican president,
yeah,
which is why we need to be concerned.
I seem to recall Obama saying he had an inbox from hell, and wouldn't we all be jealous to have that inbox right now?
Thank you very much. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Now recognize the gentleman from South Carolina.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield the chairman as much time as you need.
Thank you. I just want to make a couple quick points. On Doge, I would say to everybody that part of the problem there and some of the frustration that people have is over the time, both Democrats and Republicans have given so much power to the executive branch. And it's always that language you see in the bills, and we see it all the time, and you can't ferret it out every time, where it says, as the secretary may determine, or, any language that gives power to the secretary, you're giving that power to the president. So as far as, how many workers are needed to accomplish a certain purpose, how many folks are needed, whether or not a particular program is necessary, you're going to find in a lot of cases, and I haven't examined every one that my colleagues on the other side of the aisle may have a complaint about, but I suspect you're going to find in most of those areas we have left so much power to the executive branch that they do have the authority to do it. The courts will sort that out, but make no mistake about it, if we don't want that happening, it's incumbent upon us as Republicans and Democrats, both sides of the aisle, working to bring back power to the Congress. And we saw that last year when the architect, or maybe it was the year before, the architect of the Capitol was brought back in with a bill that was a bipartisan bill, was brought back into the legislative fold and taken out of the executive branch control. The architect of the Capitol was actually picked by the president previously. That shouldn't happen. We have lots of other agencies like that. There's some bills floating out there. I expect to be on one sometime in the next 10 days that will bring back some more legislative area agencies into congressional authority that we have ceded, in my opinion wrongly, to the executive branch. But that's a big part of the frustration that people have is it's easy to say, let's give the power to the administration when everything's running smoothly. And when there is a conflict, we want to say, oh, they're doing it wrong. Well, we gave them the power. We don't want them to have the power. We got to take it back. I yield back to the gentleman from South Carolina.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank both of you for coming. I have no further questions. Thank you.
Gentleman yields back now. Recognize the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Jack.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Flood, just to get back to the legislation at hand, one question I have is the impact on small and medium-sized banks in our communities as it relates to the drawn-out review process. Could you speak to the strain that some of these small banks, which, by the way, are facing, a make-or-break survival mode as they're undergoing these open-ended review processes? Can you speak to the strain imposed on those banks by this regulation?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Jack. I would say lengthy, uncertain reviews are incredibly costly. Banks have to keep teams tied up for months, sometimes years, waiting on decisions, and that diverts resources from day-to-day operations, customer services, and, business leaders want certainty, and uncertainty is one of the worst things for planning. If you're trying to expand, serve more communities, or offer better products, waiting endlessly for a green light from regulators can stall or kill those plans, and the OCC's rule would have made this process worse, not better.
Thank you very much, and thank you both for your testimony today, and I yield back to our chairman.
And the gentleman yields back. That concludes our questions for the witnesses today. Thank you all so very much. It's been a lively debate, and I look forward to seeing you all on the floor on this issue and others. And we will take, what, a minute, 2 minutes? Just a minute to switch. Just a minute, so we can switch, folks. So give us a minute to switch witnesses out, and we'll go on to the next one. I now welcome our second panel, Chairman Guthrie and Representative Tonko from the Committee on Energy and Commerce. Your full statement will be submitted for the record, and we ask that you summarize your statement in 5 minutes. Chairman Guthrie, I welcome your testimony. You're now recognized for your 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I appreciate you and Ranking Member McGovern and the members of the Rules Committee for the opportunity to testify before you today. In the Biden administration and the Obama administration and the Clinton administrations before that, imposed regulation after regulation on American businesses and making it more difficult and expensive to produce the energy products and jobs we need to keep America strong. The first Trump administration took many important steps to roll back burdensome regulations to unleash the American economy. The Biden administration tried undoing the good work of the first Trump administration in the name of stopping climate change, supporting divisive DI policies, and through last November, the American people spoke out strongly against these policies in favor of returning America where innovation thrives. One of the unnecessary and costly rules the Biden administration issued, known as the once in, always in rule, is the subject of the Congressional Review Act resolution of disapproval that's before the committee today. I am grateful for the opportunity to testify before you in support of SJ Res 31, which passed the Senate earlier this month. This CRA is a companion to HJ Res 79, which was introduced by Rep. Fedorchak and co-sponsored by Reps. Balderson and Allen, all members of the Energy and Commerce Committee. The resolution would overturn a rule issued by the Biden administration on September 10, 2024, under the Clean Air Act that penalizes businesses for making investments to reduce their emissions. Under Section 112 of the Clean Air Act, regulated sources that emit more than 10 tons per year of one hazardous air pollutant or 25 tons of a combination of HAPs, hazardous air pollutant, is called a HAP, are designated as major sources and therefore subject to strict compliance requirements and Big Brother-like continuous monitoring directives. Entities that emit less than this threshold are designated as area sources and are subject to more flexible and often less costly requirements because they pollute less than major sources. Under the once in, always in rule, which is based on a policy first issued by EPA during the Clinton administration, a regulated entity that is classified a major source cannot later reclassify as an area source, even after they have taken steps to reduce their emissions below the major source threshold through the installation of pollution control equipment or operational limits. In other words, the regulation is a one-way street, which creates a disincentive for businesses to take steps to reduce their emissions. Think about that. This is a regulation designed to reduce emissions, yet in practice, the opposite effect. Once you're in, you can never leave. This is a wrong-headed approach resulting in punishment for doing the right thing. The Trump administration understood the problem with the once and always in policy. In 2018, it took steps to undo the Clinton administration policy memo that was followed by a common sense rule in 2020 that interpreted the Clean Air Act in a way that so that a major source could be reclassified as an area source if it reduced emissions below the major source level. Shortly after taking office, the Biden EPA worked to undo the legacy of the first Trump administration, including roll back the 2020 rule, issuing its own rule and reinstating the misguided once in, always in. So this rule imposes significant regulatory burdens on businesses with little environmental benefit. Once you're labeled a major source, investment capital gets swallowed up by endless compliance without serving the environment. Instead, we should focus every invested dollar on jobs, growth, and innovation, a win-win-win for the economy. I support this resolution and urge my colleagues on the Rules Committee to do so as well. Thank you.
Gentleman yields back and now recognize Mr. Tonko for his 5 minutes opening statement.
Thank you, Congressman. Thank you to the chair and ranking member and members of the committee. I'm here to testify on SJ Res 31, a resolution that seeks to block EPA's reclassification of major sources as area sources rule. I strongly oppose this resolution. I strongly oppose this absurd Republican effort as a preview to stripping health care from millions of Americans to give giant tax breaks to billionaires. Congressional Republicans are incapable of helping everyday Americans. As they work behind closed doors to cut deals that would make their disastrous reconciliation bill even worse, they needed something to occupy Congress's time. So here we are, once again, turning to dangerous CRAs. This time it is a CRA that would make the air unsafe to breathe as a favor to polluting special interests. The resolution before us today does absolutely nothing to help everyday people, and it would actively harm Americans' health. SJ Res 31 would hamstring EPA's ability to protect the public from the worst of the worst cancer-causing toxic air pollutants from the largest industrial emitters. The CRA would eliminate a 2024 rule put in place by the Biden administration to ensure that large industrial facilities, like chemical plants and oil refineries, that emit tons of hazardous air pollutants continue to control that pollution. These facilities would not be able to reclassify as area sources if they pump some of the worst pollution into the air, specifically from 7 of the most dangerous pollutants, including mercury, alkylated lead, and PCBs. In 1990, Congress identified these and 180 additional pollutants as hazardous because they are known or suspected to cause cancer, birth defects, development disorders, and neurological problems, even at extremely low levels of exposure. In recognition of this danger, the Clean Air Act requires these major sources to implement Maximum Achievable Control Technologies, or MACT, which are proven technologies that industry leaders have demonstrated are cost-effective and available in the real world. Since the 1990s, facilities have been required to cut emissions to the maximum degree of reduction achievable, including completely eliminating hazardous air pollutants when possible. Rescinding this rule would allow these major sources to increase their toxic air pollution by millions of pounds each year, endangering the health of American communities. With this resolution, Republicans are giving an estimated 1,800 facilities across our country the green light to permanently shut off their long-installed pollution control equipment, spew hazardous air pollution into the air with reckless abandonment, and increase cancer-causing pollution without consequence. The Clean Air Act amendments of 1990 is a tremendous success story. It is not only a public health success, but a shining example of how bipartisanship in Congress can indeed benefit the American people. That law was enacted with some 401 votes in the House, and Americans have been able to breathe air with less mercury and other cancer-causing pollution ever since. But this resolution puts that success in deep jeopardy, and it is a sad reflection of the majority's legislative priorities. Americans are struggling to make ends meet and facing the reality that Republicans may soon strip health care from 13.7 million people. But their focus is on repealing common-sense rules that make the air safer to breathe. S.J. Res. 31 is deeply irresponsible. Congress should be trying to protect Americans, not trying to make them sick. So I strongly oppose S.J. Res. 31, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have. With that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Now recognize Mr. Langworthy for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Chairman Guthrie, and to my colleague from New York for being here with us today on what is, in fact, a common-sense solution that rewards American industry for operating in a cleaner, healthier manner. Can you remind us once more today that by shifting a facility's classification from a major source area to area source, would that facility no longer be subject to pollution controls, monitoring, and reporting requirements?
So yes, I mean, so that's what it sounded like when you heard my friend speak, and that's absolutely not true. So you get designated a major source of pollution versus an area source. That's the classification above. And so the issue is, once you get designated a major source, no matter what you do, you stay a major source forever, once in, always in. And so what we're saying, let's give the incentive for people to lower their standard, where they do operational controls. Let's say we're not gonna operate 24/7, 7 days a week. We're gonna put other equipment in to get below the area, to become an area source. But once you're an area source, you're still subject to the Clean Air Act. You're still subject to other issues. It's not as costly, and it's not so instead of tying up capital dollars complying, you lower your standard. So you comply, become an area source, and you're still subject to the Clean Air Act. And it was clear, there was a 2018 memo when the Trump administration did this, that at any time you could be put back into major source category if you do emit the level of pollution of a major source.
Thank you for clarifying that, Mr. Chairman, and I do appreciate you reiterating the point, but because it seems to be lost on my Democratic colleagues, moving to an area source designation does not exempt a facility from environmental regulations or controls. And to that point, under the Trump-era policy, which this CRA would help pave the way for, a facility reaches that area source classification because it sees its hazardous air pollutant emissions return to major source levels, can be classified as a major source again. Isn't that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you, Chairman Guthrie. Clearly, this is about restoring common sense and giving business the tools and incentives to operate more responsibly, not burying them in red tape. And I think that more of my colleagues here who often rail against the so-called big polluters would think this as well, but instead many side with radical environmental groups that would rather see job creators regulated out of business than be given a real chance to improve our environment. But simply put, we don't have to choose between a healthy planet and a strong economy. We can have both if we focus on smart policy and not political posturing. So thank you again, Chairman Guthrie. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Now recognize Ms. Scanlon for her questions.
Thank you. Mr. Tonko, I wanted to focus on an issue that's particularly important in my district and see how the regulation we're discussing relates to that. So asthma caused by air pollution is one of the leading environmental health threats that children face in Philadelphia. More than 1 in 5 kids in my region suffer from asthma. That's more than 3 times the national rate. And I'm concerned about what this resolution might mean for kids in the area. Can you explain what the difference is here?
We believe that there would be, no incentive for them to not turn off their equipment or not to upgrade multitude of those toxins. So it's, you know, there is no opportunity here, I think. There's an opportunity to downslide, and we think that would be tragic for the outcome of the environment and for the region that, that these facilities are located in. Remember, we've put a lot of focus on environmental justice, and that seems to be pulled back with the work that's being done on this budget, and to make certain that people have appropriate health care coverage, because if we're putting them at risk, you know, they're now a population in greater woe, and making certain that they have this health care coverage that EJ has addressed for their given region or neighborhood, and that we go forward with the sound rules that require them to be looked at again as the original law had intended.
Okay, I appreciate that, because our Republican colleagues have expressed a lot of concern about the regulatory burden on business, but I'm more concerned about the environmental burden on children in our region, and the fact that it seems as though if we pass this resolution, it's going to mean more mercury and lead and benzene in the air, and toxins that can cause cancer and birth defects and permanent brain damage, in addition to the issue of asthma. We've seen developmental problems in children and preventable medical problems that they will have to live with and that we'll all have to pay for, one way or the other. You know, that is really my primary concern, so this feels like an irresponsible attempt to remove this regulation. I don't think you can find a single person, other than maybe an oil or gas lobbyist, who will tell you that they want more lead in the air. And I'm sure that, you know, folks who can afford to live in big houses far away from refineries and chemical plants and trash to steam plants, et cetera, you know, don't mind how much crap they spew in the air, but it means a lot to the folks in my region. And you know, shifting those burdens of business from the corporation onto the kids in our region doesn't seem like a fair or an honorable trade. So I don't really see how this fits with the whole Make America Healthy Again agenda. I do see how it fits with an effort to kick Americans off their health care, because once again, that's shifting the costs of business to everyday Americans, and it does seem to fit with the branding of the Republican Party at this point, but it's certainly nothing I want a part of. So.
Right, well, these people would be more at risk, and certainly you highlight a number of the health-related concerns, beyond cancer, which is very dangerous and concerning, but neurological impairment, the asthma issue, a lot of work that, you know, developmental issues that can develop because of these pollutants. Well, and it can just be a small fraction of a gram.
Well, I mean, during our lifetimes, we've seen the impact of having cleaner air, cleaner water. We've seen the beneficial impacts of it. We've seen reduction in these kinds of diseases. We've seen things like, you know, being able to eat fish out of our lakes and rivers because they're not contaminated with mercury. We've seen people be able to play outside, children be able to play outside if they're not combating toxic air. So I think this takes the wrong path, and I'd urge a vote against it.
Sure.
Thank you. I yield
Thank
back.
you.
Thank you, Ms. Scanlon. Mr. Scott, you're recognized.
Madam Chair, I don't have any questions. I would point out that there seems to be a lot of drama around this. I think we should pass the rule, but the Biden administration had 48 months, and my understanding is they put this rule in September of 2024, correct?
It did,
After they had
September.
basically already lost the last election?
Well, it was put out in September, yes. Put out in
Yeah.
September.
See, anyway, I support the legislation.
Thank you very much. Ms. Leisure Fernandez, you're recognized.
Hello, Madam Chair, and thank you. So I'm looking at this rule, and the thing about rules is when you do them right, you get a lot of input from industry, you get a lot of input from the community, and then you develop the rule. Is that how rules usually are generated and created? I mean,
Right, and the agencies do that. I mean, they get input.
yeah,
I'm not
they
sure
get
exactly
input.
how they do it.
Public comment is really important, right? And I think that's why it's fascinating when you say, well, we shouldn't do this because they did it, you know, towards the end. Well, it takes time to gather that input. But I am just, I read what's going to happen. And just reading about these chemicals, mercury, an extremely toxic metal that will then be able to be released, alkylated lead. We should be about removing lead from both our pipes and our air. Dioxins and furans, some of the most toxic chemicals known to humankind. PCBs. These, anytime you have a hard time saying things like this, the polycyclic organic matter. Right, these are some of the most toxic chemicals that we know of. And if we do this, it will be that there are, let me see, is this right, Mr. Takano, 1,800 industrial facilities will be able to escape the Clean Air Act's pollution limits?
Yeah, that's the numbers that we've received. In the process of going through rulemaking, we have a comment where you have a comment period and a notice given is an inclusive process that allows for everyone to respond with great passion and with great concern, and to highlight the technical merits of that rulemaking. And I think it's important for us to understand that the numbers that you just quoted are significant in that some of the damage here could never be turned around.
Right, because some of this damage is brain damage, birth defects. Right, you're developmentally impaired for the rest of your life. Is that correct with some of these chemicals?
Absolutely, and I think it's making certain that the biggest polluters are maintained in this process where they have to abide in accordance with the rules and make certain that they achieve those thresholds that have been made possible because of the development of technology.
So I think I'm going to go back to a comment we made in the earlier panel that Republicans love to complain about regulation, but what they're really saying is we stand with the biggest corporation instead of the citizens, the residents, the Americans who will be exposed to health risks like this. You know, I'm just really glad that Democrats are willing to stand on the side of our families, especially the ones who live near these facilities, and the jobs are important, but you should not have to sacrifice your health, the health of your unborn child and your children for that job. It should be clean, and you can clean it up. So I do appreciate that. If we had this rule, you'd be forced to clean up the mess before it goes out of the smokestack. Is that correct, Mr.?
Yeah. I think it's important, too, to recognize that a great impetus was placed on reducing the harms to some neighborhoods that are host to these facilities by investing a lot of the funds from recent past history successes that were done that invest the funds to address air pollution and monitor those efforts so that there's achievable results and success for the people in those neighborhoods.
And this is a process of getting cleaner air and cleaner water that the United States has been embarked on in Democratic and Republican administrations until we ran into the Trump administration, both last time and now this time, where they are simply abandoning this progress that we have made that really is about America's promise to say, let us be an industrial leader, but still clean up the air. So, you know, I am hopeful, you know, we know where the votes are. I don't think we'll get a single Republican standing up for their constituents and clean air, but thank you very much for bringing this before us. And with that, Madam Chair, I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Leisure-Fernandez. Mr. Griffith, you're recognized.
Chairman Guthrie, I was just looking, since the whole issue of mercury and others has come up, I was looking at for some learned documents and treatises, but I recall and found some from the early 2000s into the up as late as 2016, and was looking for some others, and there's some really interesting stuff going on. But isn't it true that a significant percentage, and at one time a majority, and I can't say whether it's still a majority, of the mercury found in the western part of the United States actually came from Asian pollution sites?
I understand that study. I don't know which one you're actually quoting, but I've heard that as well. But can I just kind of?
Yes, please.
So, actually, I went to college in the Hudson Valley, and other than Kentucky, it's probably one of the most beautiful places in our country. And you couldn't swim in the Hudson River, other than Kentucky, and you couldn't get in the water because of what had happened in industrial. And that's not what we want. That's not what I'm advocating. Matter of fact, when I first, other than just the famous name, when I first ever heard of our current health secretary, he was leading the fight to clean up the Hudson River back in the 1980s when I was in college. And so, gosh, I absolutely are not here advocating for anything near that. And it sounds like we're trying to get rid of the regulation that regulates all these pollutants, and we're absolutely not. What we're saying is, if you're a business in the areas that are anywhere, but areas you talk about where it affects our kids, our families, our rivers, but this is clean air, not clean water, but clean air, but all of it, and you're identified as a major source because you break a threshold, and it should be, because you break the threshold, you're identified as a major source, and you should be identified as a major source. We're not debating that. The question is, if you do the environmental cleaning of your business, operational hours, put the equipment in place to bring yourself below the threshold of being a major source, then you fall under the Clean Air Act. You're still regulated, but you're regulated under area sources. And that's what we're arguing, is not getting rid of regulating these businesses, just how you're classified, and encourage businesses that are identified as a major source to do the work, to eliminate the pollution, to lower it to a point where they're an area source. That's what we're arguing.
And Mr. Chairman, isn't it true that if you can't go back down, so you go up over the limit, you figure out, okay, wait a minute, we didn't do it the way we should have on this, and you go back down, you become a small source, you're more likely to stay with your manufacturing at that location instead of maybe looking to offshore it somewhere else where they don't have any regulations or have many regulations compared to our regulations, because if you go into that category of the major source permanently, you're going to have more expense and more long-term more expense and more of an issue. So if you're on the fence about whether you should shut down your American facility and move somewhere else, that could be the tipping point, could it not?
Well, it does bring in an incentive to move or relocate or just stay a major source. Right. And not put in the effort or the operational different things you can do as a business to lower your output. You just be qualified as a major source, report your major source, and I don't think people who put this in place intends that, but it certainly is an incentive to stay a major source and not become an area source.
Well, it's a disincentive to clean up the pollution
to
that
lower
you're putting
to that
into the
point.
air, right? And so you would be better off to have this CRA passed so that if somebody became a major source but then was able to put in controls or mechanisms or figure out how to do it correctly, they could once again become an area source, is still regulated, but regulated as an area source under the Clean Air Act as opposed to a major source under the Clean Air Act.
If this CRA passes, if you're a major source polluter or emissions of major source, you remain a major source. If you do the work, the equipment, the operational, anything you can do to lower yourself below that standard that made you a major source, then you become an area source. At any time, if you become an area source and you become a major source emitter again, you become a major source again. But it does give you incentive to get below that threshold because you get to operate you're operating cleaner. So you get to operate in a cleaner way.
Yeah, and that's the whole idea. And my concern is that if we don't have a reasonable requirement that says you can move back down to an area source, you're more likely to move overseas. And it's always driven me crazy, Mr. Chairman, that my colleagues, even with their good intentions, sometimes force these businesses to countries that don't have the regulations, cement to Mexico, industries to Asia, and the next thing you know, the air brings all that stuff back, maybe not as much as what is emitted in China or in Mexico, but we still get the air pollution, and in many cases, greater than what we would have gotten if we had reasonable regulations. And what you're trying to do here is to have regulations, right, but make it so that if somebody's cleaning up their act, they can actually move down to an area source as
That's what
opposed
we
to being
think is
a major
common
source.
sense. If we repeal this, it does not take a major source to an area source. You only get to become an area source if your emissions fall below the threshold, which
So it's
is
not
what we all
automatic.
want.
You have to clean up
And that's
Your
what, I think
emissions.
that's common to what we want.
Absolutely, I agree, and I yield back, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Norman, you're recognized. Mr. Jack, you're recognized.
Well, I'll just thank the chairman for your continued pursuit of deregulation. It's something you campaigned on, I campaigned on, President Trump campaigned on, and clearly the American people want to continue to see. The only question that I have is, I just would like noted for the record, as I understand it, the introducer on the Senate side is Mr. Curtis, who is one of the more environmentally, friendly Republicans in our Congress, and would love to hear any thoughts. You served with him. I did not yet have that privilege to do so in the House, but would welcome any thoughts on his sponsorship of this.
Well, he's one of my dear friends here, and he did leave what we call the Conservative Climate Caucus, and he always started with the premise that less carbon is better. So let's come up with what we can agree on. And I think you could just extrapolate from him saying that less pollution is. We all agree less pollution is better. And I do believe this is an incentive to have less pollution emitted.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. With that, Madam Chair, I yield back to you.
Madam Chair, I would only note that there's no evidence that these corporations would invest more with advanced technology or that they would not turn off some of their controls. Look, the data compilation is important here. As we're gutting an agency, the public has a right to know. The compilation needs to be done. It needs to be shared. And whatever that source of mercury might be is what we're going to attack as a goal, as a challenge to provide for better outcomes, public health-wise, for Americans.
Thank you, Mr. Tonko. Chair Guthrie and Mr. Griffith, I just want to thank you for the interaction that went on between you and for what Mr. Jack said, for setting the record straight on what this CRA does and doesn't do. I think it's just extremely important that that happened. I was going to have a line of questioning along questions along those lines, so I appreciate the clarification that you made. With that, the committee will stand in recess until 6:15. The committee will reconvene. The chair will be in receipt of a motion from the gentleman from New York, Mr. Langworthy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move that the committee grant S.J. Res. 13, providing for congressional disapproval under Chapter 8 of Title 5, United States Code of the Rules submitted by the Office of the Controller of the Currency of the Department of the Treasury relating to the review of applications under the Bank Merger Act, a closed rule. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the joint resolution. The rule provides that the joint resolution shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points of order against provisions in the joint resolution. The rule provides 1 hour of general debate equally divided and controlled by the chair and the ranking minority member of the Committee on Financial Services or their respective designees. The rule provides 1 motion to commit. The rule provides for consideration of S.J. Res. 31, providing for congressional disapproval under Chapter 8 of Title 5, United States Code of the Rule, submitted by the Environmental Protection Agency relating to the review of final rule reclassification of major sources as area sources under Section 112 of the Clean Air Act under a closed rule. The rule waives all points of order against the consideration of the joint resolution. The rule provides that the joint resolution shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points of order against the provisions in the joint resolution. The rule provides 1 hour of general debate equally divided and controlled by the chair and the ranking minority member of the Committee on Energy and Commerce or their respective designees. The rule provides 1 motion to commit. Finally, the rule provides that the requirement of Clause 6A of Rule 13 for a 2/3 vote to consider a report from the Committee on Rules on the same day it is presented to the House is waived with respect to any resolution reported through the legislative day of May 23rd, 2025, relating to a measure providing for reconciliation pursuant to the Title II of H. Con. Res. 14.
Thank you very much, Mr. Langworthy. You now heard the motion. Is there any discussion or amendment to the rule? Mr. McGovern.
Yeah, I'm just going to offer 1 amendment, and that is, that we move to strike Section 3 of the resolution. And the reason why I'm doing that is because this is an enormous bill we're talking about here that's going to impact millions and millions of people. And, we need to make sure that we understand what we're voting for. We need to give CBO an opportunity to do any new calculations that they need to do. And there's no like real deadline here. It's an artificial, made-up deadline that you have come up with. And so, can we all at least agree that people ought to we ought to do our due diligence here today and not rush this thing to the floor in a way that, again, doesn't even give CBO the ability to review this stuff. And again, things are changing as well. I mean, I'm hearing about all these side deals that are being made, and that may be pleasing to some people on this panel. I just don't know what they mean. And major changes are being made, and I think we ought to have an opportunity to be able to review it. And the other thing is, I thought you guys were against same-day rules, but I guess I was wrong. So I would urge that we again support my amendment to strike Section 3.
Madam Chair, can I speak to the amendment?
Well, I was going to respond.
Oh, okay.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Gill. Same-day authority is a long-standing tool utilized by both sides of the aisle, designed to provide flexibility for urgent and time-sensitive matters, and that's certainly the case for this week. The rule before us today provides same-day authority and limits it to only legislation related to reconciliation through the end of the week. This concise, narrow application is an appropriate use. Let's contrast that to when the Democrats previously held the gavel. During this time, for an unprecedented nearly 2-year period, the House continuously operated with same-day authority for any measure. While this may have been necessary to respond rapidly during the early stages of the COVID pandemic. Simply put, it became a tool of convenience for then Speaker Pelosi. Once again, those in glass houses should not throw stones. Ms. Scanlon?
If I could just respond.
Ms. Scanlon, you're
I
recognized.
would yield to the ranking member.
Two, the rule that you're referring to was during the pandemic, and these were extraordinary times. But the other thing is, we're dealing with a bill right now that's going to add $5 trillion to the deficit. And and again, and I don't know what the emergency is, because again, there's nothing that says you can't do this when you get back. I mean, nothing happens. And you have an opportunity to make sure that all your members, and certainly all our members, know what the hell they're voting on, and know what the implications are. So I yield back to Ms. Scanlon.
Thank you. I mean, I have to support this amendment. We've got a bill that is incredibly amorphous. We are learning more about what's in the bill from tweets that are online or various reporting, but we certainly don't have a final version of the bill yet. The last version of it that was voted on was at 10 o'clock on a Sunday night, so not exactly a time when people are around to be able to digest it. Now we're going to take it up again 1 o'clock Wednesday morning. That's hardly responsible legislation. And as the ranking member mentioned, this is a bill that thus far has caused Moody's and other agencies to downgrade the U.S. bond ratings. We don't have a CBO score on it. The whole rationale for this bill is supposed to be to address the deficit, when in fact it's going to raise the deficit by $3 to $5 trillion. Your whole rationale for cutting 8 to 13 million people off Medicaid is that you have to reduce the deficit, but it appears to be a charade. So I think this amendment does a good job of calling the charade out for what it is. There's no reason to rush this. The fact that it's being called pursuant to an emergency rules committee is another part of the charade. And so I think we should hold the line. I hope everyone takes a stand against same-day authorization here instead of simply voting present, say. I yield back.
Well, I'm going to recognize my colleagues here in just a moment, but I do want to say there are no side deals being made. The bill is out there. It has been out there. So everybody has had a chance to read it who wants to read it. And when there is a manager's amendment, then that will be where the changes are, and they'll be clearly identified. So we're not talking about you're not being able to read the bill. But I'm going to now recognize Mr. Langworthy. If you have, do you have any comments? Any further discussion on our side? Oh, Ms.
Well,
Fernandez.
since your side doesn't really want to discuss the idea of fast-tracking this bill, I would suggest maybe we invite Mr. Rory back, because Mr. Rory has been very vocal about adhering to these rules, which were negotiated so that they would have enough time. Perhaps we can wait to vote till he comes back in. But in the meantime, while we perhaps wait for him to come back in, since nobody else seems to want to speak to it, but maybe now somebody will want to do in response, Mr. Arrington, the chair of the Budget Committee, when it was pointed out repeatedly that there was no CBO score for what the Budget Committee passed out, said that there would be one, and we don't have one yet. So I think without a CBO score, we can address the issues that some of my colleagues here have said are very important about the deficit. Is it $5 trillion? Is it $4 trillion? We know it's a lot. It's a lot. It's a lot. I mean, I'm very worried about Mr. Massey's little, timer. It's going to be burning a hole in his suit. And whether or not he can convince any of his colleagues who say they also believe in reining in the deficit, how can you talk about it if you don't know what the CBO score is? And we just heard earlier, Madam Chair, that there were going to be tweaks to the bill. Now, we don't know what those tweaks are. Tweaks could be some grammatical changes, or tweaks could be significant. So to say that there aren't any changes, when earlier tonight we heard there was going to be tweaks. And once again, we have been downgraded. Our credit rating has been downgraded. Aren't Republicans freaked out? The idea that the United States credit has been downgraded because of the bill that you were ramming through in our vampire committee hearing that starts at 1 a.m., you should at least let us have a night and morning and dawn of discussion and then let it sink in. Because the American people, and in fact, a lot of Republicans don't know what's in that bill. Like, you should give your own caucus the time to understand what's in that bill, tweaks and all. And so with that, Madam Chair, I would urge, especially for those who talk about this all the time, Mr. Norman, Mr. Roy, have them, weigh in on this. So I don't see the door opening again to see if Mr. Roy will come back.
Do you yield back?
Well, I was hoping Mr. Roy would come back. He was just here. This is something he talks about all the time, he cares a lot about. See no movement, see no comment from the Republicans. I yield back.
Hearing no further discussion, the question is on the amendment. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no.
No.
In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The amendment's not agreed to.
As for roll call, Madam Chair.
Mr. McGovern requests a roll call vote. The clerk will call the roll.
Mrs. Fishbach. Mr. Norman. Mr. Norman, no. Mr. Roy. Mrs. Houchin. Mrs. Houchin, no. Mr. Langworthy. Mr. Langworthy, no. Mr. Scott. Mr. Scott, no. Mr. Griffith? Mr. Griffith, no. Mr. Jack?
No.
Mr. Jack, no. Mr. McGovern?
Aye.
Mr. McGovern, aye. Ms. Scanlon? Aye. Ms. Scanlon, aye. Mr. Neguse? Ms. Ledger-Fernandez? Aye. Ms. Ledger-Fernandez, aye. Madam Chair?
No.
Madam Chair, no.
The clerk will report the tally.
3 yeas, 7 nays.
And the noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to. Are there any other amendments or discussion? Hearing no further discussion, the questions on the motion from the gentleman from New York. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say no.
No.
In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The motion's agreed to. Mr. McGovern requests a recorded vote. The clerk will call the roll.
Mrs. Fishbach. Mr. Norman. Mr. Norman, yea. Mr. Roy. Mrs. Houchin. Ms. Houchin, aye. Mr. Langworthy. Mr. Langworthy, aye. Mr. Scott. Mr. Scott, aye. Mr. Griffith. Mr. Griffith, aye. Mr. Jack.
Aye.
Mr. Jack, aye. Mr. McGovern.
No.
Mr. McGovern, no. Ms. Scanlon. Ms. Scanlon, no. Mr. Neguse. Ms. Ledger-Fernandez. Ms. Ledger-Fernandez, no. Madam Chair.
Aye.
Madam Chair, aye.
The clerk will report the tally.
7 yeas, 3 nays.
And the ayes have it. The motion to report is agreed to. Accordingly, the gentleman from New York, Mr. Langworthy, will be managing this rule for the majority.
And I'll manage it for the Democrats.
And Mr. McGovern manages for the Democrats. Without objection, the committee is adjourned.